Well, this weekend at our house, we began the process of decorating for Christmas. And this is always an interesting process in our house, carrying up all the boxes from the basement, wondering why there were so many boxes in the basement. Who needs this much stuff? And then thinking, every year I say, you know what, we're not going to put everything out. Let's just look and see what we love the most. And every year we put everything out. My favorite, though, is pulling out the ornaments and sharing the memories behind them. Maybe you have a tradition, too, where each year you choose an ornament for a particular reason, and it's fun to do that, especially those ornaments that I chose for my children before they could pick for themselves, because there are just funny little memories and little quirks that we remember of them being children. And then the ornaments from my childhood, which my daughter always says to me, "Oh, is this from your time?" Yes, it is. That ornament is from the turn of the century. It is from my time. Thank you very much for reminding me of that. So we love to do that. And we also love to pull out some of our favorite decorations that are from this flea market right here. In fact, some of the decorations on our house were in some of your houses for many years. They have new life in our house, and we love that. And we love to talk about that and think about that. We do have one Santa with kind of a creepy face. He did not come out of the box, but he's going to. He's going to eventually when I'm feeling like I need to have that out. And eventually we will unbox our nativity scene as well. We haven't quite done that yet because we're kind of trying to build the Advent stuff here at our house too. Well, this sweet process of preparing our home for the season is a far cry from the preparation that we hear from Scripture this morning. Our images of cozy hot chocolate and Christmas-filled decorating is quite a bit different than a thief in the night. We aren't thinking about a prowler. We're thinking about a baby in a manger. We are not thinking about debauchery or licentiousness. We're thinking about gift giving and baking and Christmas music. But if there's one thing that we hear this morning, it's that Jesus, both Matthew's version and what Paul is inviting us to think about, Jesus isn't a meek and mild baby, but an interrupter, a disruptor, an intruder even. This Jesus is a lover of justice and breaks into our lives in moments when we are ignoring him. He is the alarm clock that shocks us out of sleep. And maybe that is the first place that we should pause on this first Sunday of Advent, to notice that we might just be asleep, that we might be missing what is going on around us, or maybe even worse, ignoring it. Jesus likens the coming of the Son of Man to the days of Noah's flood. Before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage. Jesus says they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them away. He's making the point here that they were going on with life as usual. Maybe living a life that, wasn't too bad, that wasn't too painful, ignoring those whose lives were anything but painful. Or perhaps just thinking, it's bad now, but it won't be forever. This too shall pass. I think it's really hard to accept the fact that we might not be awake, that we're missing really big, profound spiritual realities because we are just ignoring it, because we are settled and settling in life. We want to believe that the status quo will save us. We want to believe that business as usual will be good enough to keep us attuned to God. And I also think that we want to pretend that being a Christian will never require anything hard or costly of us. Well, this is what Jesus is trying to wake us up out of today. This is what Paul is trying to shake us out of as well. You know, our gospel passage today comes following some questions of Jesus about what happens next for his followers. And to be clear, the writer is addressing issues faced by the people under Roman rule in the first century. Life was uncertain. Fear was rampant. Choosing to rock the boat, to buck the system, to challenge the status quo could get you thrown in prison or worse. And it appears from both of our writings today that the authors expected something to change. They expected that life wouldn't always be like this, that it would be different. And I think that they expected, especially Paul writing to the church of Rome, that Jesus would return in their time. You know, it's interesting. I can remember as a kid, my mom leaving a bit with expectations of my brother and me, of chores to do, things to accomplish, or like just don't tear up the house while I'm gone, don't fight while I'm gone. When we knew what was expected, but didn't know exactly when she would be back, we did things a little differently. We were much more vigilant about getting our tasks done and watching for her or listening for the sound of the garage door. Maybe there is a connection to be made between that silly example and what it was like to be in the first century, a person who was trying to understand who this Jesus was and what do we do in a world where none of this is accepted, those followers of Christ who didn't know exactly what was next, but who believed with their whole being that something would happen, that something was about to change. And Matthew, Jesus' words, and Paul in his letter to this church were urging people to trust that and to live in a way that reflected that. I wonder if that is where we Christians, all these years later, have a problem, a deficit of belief, a feeling that maybe it doesn't really matter, a tendency to fall asleep because, you know, what does it even matter anyway? I mean, really, how many of us are sitting around actively waiting for Jesus to return to earth? How many of us are really waiting on that, preparing for it? And if you were to prepare for it, what would you do anyway? Well, it's my opinion that if we believed, if we really believed, and that led to real and honest preparation, we might just turn away from fear and we might have hope. Hope. And friends, hope is what leads to courage. And courage allows us to do things that we might not have done. It allows us to wake up, to not sleep through life, to not ignore when others are suffering, to not just fall into our own ways of doing things and focus on ourselves so much that everything else falls apart around us. It allows us to get out of our complacency, to see where life is difficult, and allows us to get out of the echo chambers that we place ourselves in, where we only hear what we want to hear. It allows us to listen for the call of justice and to actually do something. You know, this time of year, we are often so generous with our Christmas families. I love how every year that tree gets emptied and filled again and emptied and filled again, and we are able to offer hope and a Christmas to so many people. We are generous with our food pantry, especially at a time when it is needed so much. I still can't get over, people are still coming to the door saying, I'm bringing some food. People are still calling and saying, do you take donations? People are still sending checks. And with giving coats, we are so generous with that, especially on a day like today when we wake up and we're suddenly freezing as if we didn't know it was coming. If you're like me, you think, oh, I suppose I better get the coat out. We are so generous at this time of year with all that. And I think that we do that out of hope that comes with wakefulness. But it should not stop there. Those beautiful acts of generosity should shake us into noticing those around us, that there is a need for why there is a need for things. They should help us to recognize that, why there is a need for things, and allow hope to give us the courage to do the work of justice so that everyone has enough. Everyone has what they need. I really think that is the work of Advent. That is the work of waiting. And one more thing about that. Notice where we are to be watchful. In the field, doing our job. On the ledge, sitting in the bedroom of the child who plays with us, as we heard in the story this morning. In the midst of the everyday, mundane nature of life that is really not mundane if we think about it, because that is where we are called to work, to do the work right here. For there is much for us to do, but first we have to wake up, and then we have to stay awake. In her article on this passage, author Debbie Thomas writes that during Advent, we should prepare to be robbed. We are called to make room for the long-anticipated Christ, to prepare a space for the beautiful new life that is coming. But she asks, how can we do this if we're already filled to the rafters? Well, maybe Jesus comes as a thief because we need to be robbed of some things, of the liabilities that we are not willing to give up. Then she asks, what are we clinging to that Jesus needs to take from us? Our apathy, perhaps? Our self-righteousness, our fears, our inability to forgive. You know, friends, it's really no coincidence that Jesus comes when we're asleep, when we're vulnerable. Because when else would we be willing to give up the things that we are clinging to for something better? How else would we be willing to lean into the deep work that God is doing in our lives? Where else would we be willing to see the injustice in the world and do something about it, not just in the moment, but in the long term as well? Friends, this Advent season, as we are doing all of the preparations, whatever that looks like in your lives, decorating, baking, shopping, sitting together, writing cards, whatever it is, make some room to wake up. Make some room to look for the places that God is calling us to. Let's make some room to stay awake in this time. I can't think of better news, not just for us, but for the whole world. May it be so.